This movie is technically about an old white man who doesn't like the sun and likes to nibble on the necks of women. Wait, that sounded like Joe Biden. So I just watched the 2024 remake of Nosferatu, and boy do I have a story for you. In order to understand this movie, we first need to look at the original to see how the new version fared in honoring the classic. And yes, it is a classic. Nosferatu was a silent film shot in 1922, which was directed by a German filmmaker by the name of Friedrich Murnau, who has directed over 20 films before his passing in 1931. Sadly, some of his work has been lost, where only fragments of some of his older films survived. So what makes Nosferatu, a symphony of horror, stand out the most? The film begins with a man named Hooter, who is preparing to go to work, which will eventually set him off on a journey to meet with a new client who wants to purchase a home in their area. This wealthy client is from Transylvania, and his name is Count Orlok. Looking to bring in a lot of money, Hooter tells his wife about the job and she gets a bad feeling in her gut and does not want him to go. But with so many Benjamins on the line that can help their family, Hooter leaves his wife with one of his rich friends and goes off to meet with the client so that he can sign the property contract for his estate. On his journey, he stops by an inn and mentions that he's going to Count Orlok's castle, which has everybody shitting bricks. He is told to not go there, where they mention something about a werewolf that roams the woods. Now, when I read that line, everything started to make sense. Turning in for the night, Hooter discovers a pamphlet warning him about the Nosferatu vampire. Of course he thinks nothing of it, as he prepares for tomorrow to bring in the big bucks. Hooter would, in the morning, hitch a ride with a cabbie who only takes him part of the way, because the cabbie believes that the land further yonder is cursed. So because Hooter got a job to do, he travels the rest of the way on foot and meets with a mysterious cabbie along the way, who takes him to the castle grounds. Hooter arrives and sees this tall and skinny guy walk towards him from the shadows, and it is none other than the Count himself. Orlok takes Hooter in for a bite to eat while he reads over everything, but homie cuts himself with a knife, which gets the Count very excited. Hooter is scared shitless and is told to sit on this chair on the side to rest. And he does this until morning. Just look at him! Who sleeps like that? He wakes up and finds marks on his neck? The fuck? There isn't enough gold on this earth to make me do this shit. What's weird is that during the morning, no one is around the castle. I mean nobody. Not a creature was stirring except for the mailman. Now, Hooter and Orlok are going over the paperwork to sign this sale agreement, and Orlok notices a locket with a picture of Hooter's wife, and he gets the same look in his eyes like before. This movie could have been called Blood and Bitches, and it still would have worked. But we ended up with that Snoop Dogg vampire movie. But finally, the papers are signed, and Hooter got his Benjamins and is getting ready to make it rain all over his wife. But with the pamphlet on his mind on the Nosferatu, things started getting weird. I mean really weird. Hooter is now dealing with Orlok, who is now displaying magic powers. Meanwhile, his wife is waking up and going through some episodes in the middle of the night. The next day, Hooter wakes up and eventually finds a coffin with Count Orlok in it that scares the bejesus out of him. Eventually, he notices Orlok's body in a crate being taken somewhere while Hooter is stuck in this damn castle. So he tries to escape down the window, but homie fell and got unconscious. His body was found near the water by some farmers. When he came to, he feared that the information on the pamphlet was starting to come true. Meanwhile, back in Hooter's homeland, we notice that his boss has been committed to a hospital, and I'm sure a lot of us wouldn't disagree with that sentiment. Also, Hooter's wife is distressed. While all this was happening, a ship was on its way to Hooter's homeland, and weird shit was happening the entire time. People were getting sick and becoming delirious the entire voyage. People were dying and their corpses were being thrown off the boat. One of the sailors goes into the cargo area and opens up a crate full of rats. Bro, this is why every home needs to have glue traps. And then this skinny ass motherfucker right here with nails that would put Cardi B to shame hovers out of the box and attacks the sailor, who then jumps overboard. Only one was left, and I'm not sure if that's luck at this point. Ellen continues to have her episodes, but Hooter ends up coming home. For a while, there's comfort. I say a while because then the ship with Orlok on board arrives. Meanwhile, Hooters' boss attacks one of the workers at the hospital. Then we see Orlok carry his coffin to his new home. Bro, if I saw this, I'm not staying in town for the entire night. But things get worse. A group of people investigate the ship Orlok came to shore on and found a dead sailor on board. Upon reading the ship's log, everyone got sick of the plague, where the citizens of the town issued a warning for everyone to close their doors and windows and to not leave their homes for any reason. Ellen ends up reading the pamphlet that Hooter warned her not to read, seeing that it was the cause of what he refers to as hallucinations. Listen, there isn't enough money on this earth to make me do this job, but if I had gone through bite marks and levitating old guys, the last thing I'm going to think is a book is giving me hallucinations. But here's what's crazy. Upon reading the pamphlet, Ellen tells Hooter that what she had just read, she's been seeing every day. She points outside, and across from them is this old house, and Count Orlok is just looking in through the window. That's some scary shit. Like, this actually brought back a memory based off this movie from an old TV series called Are You Afraid of the Dark? There was this one episode where this kid was working at the movie theater and he fell asleep through what actually looks like a remake of Nosferatu. At the end, the vampire bites someone and the movie ends. While this scene was happening, the kid fell asleep in the theater, but here's what's wild. After the vampire on screen bit the person to end the movie, the vampire breaks the fourth wall, walks towards the camera, and then walks through the movie screen. Dude, as a kid, I was freaking the fuck out. The kid wakes up, and as he finishes his night shift at the movies, you could see these hands with the long ass Megan Thee Stallion fingernails around the corner. I first saw this show with the lights off and my house was empty, so I was freaking out the entire time until my parents came home. Now, as it turned out, the house that Orlok bought was right across from Hooters. And that was the plan the entire time. The townspeople are now after the vampire who they believe caused the plague, but the entire time they are chasing the wrong person. They were hunting Hooters' boss, who escaped the hospital, who they believe was the vampire. Just look at him! On some Fiddler on the Roof bullshit. They chase him, and meanwhile we have this stalker ass son of a bitch casting spells on Ellen from out the window, entrapped by his enchantment. Hooter ends up putting Ellen to bed while Orlok crosses the street to lurk and sneak for Ellen. Mind you, this is a silent movie, so I can't tell whether he wants to kill her or get some pussy. Orlok ends up nibbling on Ellen's neck, Hooter's boss gets captured, and then the sun comes up. Orlok forgot what time it was and was turned to ash. Now, Ellen is free and she called out for her husband, but sadly she dies. A tragic end in a very tragic story. At first glance, from the very opening scene, I can tell we were going to look at something very artsy and very calculated. From color schemes to shot sizes as a whole, this was one of the most impressive films I've ever seen. This wasn't exactly my first introduction to the film director Robert Eggers' work. When looking back on the catalog of films that he both wrote and directed, one movie stood out to me, and it was the movie The Witch in 2015. From that moment, I could tell that this movie was going to have a very similar feel to it. This movie setup is truly a nod to a stupendous grip in lighting department, because of how well they lit not just the entire movie, but the scenes capturing Count Orlok. They took from the classic film and made the interactions between Thomas Hooter and the Count even more uncomfortable, especially since we couldn't see the Count's face at first. As the movie progresses, more of his appearance is shown, which links back to the very first scene in the dream sequence of Thomas's wife, Ellen. This is one of the things I love about the movie. It's not about jump scares, sound effects, or gore. It's about creating moments and generating an idea in the audience's head. That's how you know if you've hooked them. If you want an example of two films that does this very well, then look at the movie called A Quiet Place and the movie remake of The Woman in Black, and you can understand mood, pacing, and creating tension with the environment, be it in the daytime or at night, from just these two films. The acting from the entire cast was spot on. I was actually shocked by Bill Skarsgård's performance as Count Orlok. I've only come to know him from his portrayal of that clown from the remake of It and It Chapter 2. Bill's performance was even more impeccable, a definite opposite from Pennywise. From the dialect to even the way of breathing in the shadows makes you feel uncomfortable. And looking at Thomas's reaction to Orlok makes you even more uncomfortable. And not in a funny way, because when I was in the theater, most of the room was silent, which was a good sign. There were also two actors that stood out to me the most from this movie. The first was, of course, Ellen, played by Lily Rose Depp, aka Johnny Depp's daughter. I see a trend here, people. She took the Ellen role and worked it into her own, which wasn't a distraction from the narrative, and did not pollute the original classic. In fact, it made you even more uncomfortable because as the Count drew closer to Ellen, the stronger the hold he had on Ellen, thus causing an increase to Ellen's hysteria, which was a nice touch. The second character that also stood out to me was Professor Franz, who was played by none other than Sam Raimi's Norman Osborn, aka William Dafoe. You could just tell from all his past movies that William had a blast on set, and everyone is overjoyed to have him. Dafoe made his portrayal of the professor his own, which wasn't a distraction but a deeper look into the character as a whole, from his introduction in the movie to the very end. In essence, this movie really reminded me of just about any tragedy written by William Shakespeare. Together, the cast and crew truly created a work of art. The story opens up with a woman who we come to learn is Ellen Hooter. Ellen is seen in a trance in the middle of the night being lured by a shadowy figure out of her bedroom. She swears herself to this entity, and then we see this absolute monster on top of her outside her home. However, Ellen wakes up and it was only a dream. Thank God. Thomas, who is Ellen's husband, is in the bedroom getting ready to go to work, which appears to be his first day on the job. Ellen doesn't want him to go, but he had to leave his distraught wife because he doesn't want to be late for work. They're newlyweds, and so Thomas wants to provide the best life for him and his wife. That's what's up. Thomas arrives to his job late, but meets with his employer, who has selected him to help an old rich count in acquiring property in their hometown within Germany. This man wishes to retire from his homeland to a more peaceful setting, and the job is going to pay both of them so much money. It's a long journey there, and Thomas would have to travel as soon as possible on horseback. Thomas tells Ellen of the new job and client, and she doesn't want him to go because of nightmares she's been having, and she feared she would never see Thomas again. Thomas sets Ellen at ease and has her stay over a friend's house with his wife and two young daughters. The next day, Thomas leaves to meet with Count Orlok to have him sign papers to acquire new property. Thomas's journey takes 6 weeks on horseback through the snow. I'm looking at this and I'm like, for 6 to 7 figures, sure, I'll do this. He eventually arrives at an inn filled with gypsies who mock and make fun of him. Upon meeting the innkeeper, Thomas negotiates a stay at his abode for double the price. And you know what? It worked. As he travels through the area, we as the audience see subtitles of the gypsies praying over garlic in another language to bless it. Later that night, Thomas sees the gypsies carrying torches with a naked white girl on a horse. I see this and I'm like, what the fuck are they getting ready to do with that horse? But they arrive to the grave of someone in a coffin, where they remove the cover to kill the person inside, which looks like a corpse. Now, Thomas's dumbass doesn't know what the hell is going on, so he tells them to stop, but he wakes up in his inn and finds that the gypsies are gone and his horse has been stolen. Imagine going to a foreign country and your Mustang convertible just got taken. That's exactly what Thomas felt like as he had to travel on foot through the snow to get to Count Orlok's castle. You would have to pay me at least 7 figures and a hot bath with European models for me to take this job at this point. I don't do cold, but Thomas does. As he is traveling, Thomas arrives to this dirt road in the middle of the forest, and this horse and buggy comes to meet him. But we do not see who is driving this shit, cause it ain't solar and Elon Musk hasn't been born yet. Mind you, the gypsies at the inn told Thomas that the place he was going to was cursed. And after seeing this, I would then say to you, sir, f this job and then take my black ass home. Thomas arrives to Count Orlok's home and it is a big ass castle. As he enters, a shadowy figure meets him from the distance, telling him that he is late. And it's none other than Count Orlok himself. This dude is wrapped in shadows. We barely see his face. And the dude sounds like Wheezing Ed from Hey Arnold. Thomas is following the Count deeper into the castle, and the whole time I was praying that Thomas had some black ancestry in him that would kick in. Thomas goes to the dining table to hand the contract over to the Count, and the whole time, the way Orlok has been moving has been eerie. It was like he moved to the left and then teleported to the nigga's right within a second. As Orlok is looking over the paperwork, Thomas is cutting into some old ass loaf of bread, and he cuts himself, which gets this Count's attention. At this moment, Thomas knew he f***ed up. There isn't enough money in this world that would make me do this job at this point. The moment I saw this teleport, my ass is out the window. But Orlok wants to treat Thomas's wound, and he sits him down by the fireplace on some magical mystifying shit. And as this dusty old man approaches Thomas, Thomas wakes up. It's morning, and he is sitting in the same spot by the fireplace. My nigga, who sleeps like this? For what, 8 hours? At this point, you need to forget the money and go home. The entire time up to this point, Ellen was having episodes in the middle of the night, which kept everybody up. It got so bad that they had to call in a doctor. Her episodes got even worse, to the point that they had to tie her ass to the bed. Now, Thomas, upon waking up, notices that he had small cuts around his chest. Those are bite marks. But no, he is roaming the castle in search for the Count. However, hours passed, and when night came, Thomas was with the Count to sign the paperwork, and the deal was finally sealed. Collect your paper and roll out tonight. And sure enough, he asked to leave. The amount of relief I felt in that one line for him was as if my prayers have been answered. Thomas Hooter apparently is 2% African, but Count Orlok tells him to sleep in the quarters to rest. But Thomas is like, that's okay, I'm good, I feel ill and I need to go home. But the Count tells him to rest, and Thomas then finds himself in a bedchamber. That's why they invented Life Alert. Thomas wakes up and is running around the entire castle for a way out, but he is locked in. He stumbles upon a room with a coffin, and in it was Count Orlok. Now what happens next is confirmation that Thomas is 2% black. He grabs a pickaxe to kill this dude and actually tries to swing it at him. Let's go! But Orlok ends up grabbing it before the axe connects and he is enraged. Then that 2% of black kicked in again, cause after being thrown across the room, Thomas ran out so fast that Sonic had to do a double take. Listen, take any hood nigga faced with a vampire by himself, locked in a castle with no way out, and they would do the same exact thing. Trust me. No guns, no weapons, we run it. Thomas locks the door behind him where Orlok was, but then Thomas sees Orlok's shadow from outside the hall. The door swings open and Orlok is standing there besides two of his dogs. Thomas then finds himself in the bedchamber again, and Orlok approaches him to drink the blood from his chest. God damn, we are fucked if this can control the people that he bites or some shit. I literally felt like there was no hope. Thomas wakes up and finds holes in his chest like before, and at this moment, this is almost sexual assault. The two dogs are there in the bedchamber, and Thomas escapes out the window and he slips and falls into the water below. Crazy. Meanwhile, Ellen's condition has gotten worse. Drugs aren't helping, and the doctor there tells Thomas's friend about another doctor he knows who has experience with alchemy and the occult. They agree to meet up with Dr. Franz, and due to a close relationship he has with his colleague, he agrees to help them. Dr. Franz meets Ellen where he has her untied and then does some tests on some exorcist kind of bull, and he concludes that what has been troubling Ellen is supernatural like a demon or Nosferatu. After seeing her bend her back out, I would agree. Around the same time, we discover that Thomas's employer is put in lockdown at a hospital because he killed 2 sheep with his own hands. And this, folks, is what happens when you ask your boss for a raise. The employer is ranting and raving about how someone is coming to bring the world to its knees. Preach. I mean, what? Now, as the story progresses, a woman can be seen picking sticks by a river, and she discovers Thomas's body. From the looks of it, she appears to be one of the gypsies. When Thomas comes to, he is at the abode of the gypsies and he tells them he can't stay because someone is after his wife. So he leaves, but it appears that the gypsies managed to break or weaken whatever hold Orlok had over his body. Thomas saddles up on a horse and heads home. And now that I think about it, wasn't this the same horse that was stolen from him earlier in the movie? As Thomas makes his journey home, a ship is traveling to Thomas's homeland and weird shit is happening on board. Crew members are getting sick with the plague, and they wonder if it has anything to do with the cargo they have on board. Back at the mainland, Thomas's employer has been tied to a chair, which had recently fell, causing the employer to plead for help. A worker comes to his aid, and the employer bites into his neck to escape, killing him in the process. Lesson 322. If your employer is willing to pay you big bucks for a job and is super friendly, then he is most likely a bloodthirsty lunatic. Like earlier in this movie, as Thomas went on his journey, we saw him butt-ass naked on the ground drawing pictures by candlelight. So Dr. Franz eventually learns of what happens to Thomas's employer, and he and his associates investigate the room he killed one of the hospital employees in. This led Dr. Franz and the group to look into the employer's office, and they find carvings on the floor of occult symbols under a rug, an odd-looking artifact, and a book of secrets. On the ocean, this ship with the plague has been getting on everyone's case, so bad that people are dying. The crew are then throwing their dead overboard. This is why our oceans are polluted right now. One brave sailor ventures into the cargo area to see what the deal was, and they uncover rats in a crate, right before Count Orlok dives in for the kill. The ship containing Orlok arrives and the employer takes the coffin in a little boat to his newly purchased home, which actually looks like Michael Jackson's mansion if it was abandoned and lacked magic. Ellen is in a trance and says that he is here. She rushes outside, and to her shock, Thomas comes back on his horse, tired from his travels. Now the crazy thing is that this horse practically dumps him and then walks up the block. End scene. But this is where things start to get strange. Thomas and Ellen are asleep in the guest room of Thomas's friend, and Orlok's shadow is over Thomas, and he is having a hard time breathing. Thomas's friend's wife puts her daughters to sleep, and in the hallway, she encounters Ellen, who has a hard time sleeping. And I'm like, girl, check on your husband. The two women have a sleepover in the main bedroom, since Thomas's friend is out with Dr. Franz and the rest of Mystery Inc. When the women are asleep, the Count visits Ellen, and they discuss their previous vow to each other, which Ellen said that she was tricked to do. Orlok is pissed and said that he will give her 3 nights to proclaim herself to him again, and that this is the first night. Failure to do so will result in everyone's death. Ellen then wakes up from her dream trance and finds Thomas's friend's wife on the floor asleep covered in rats with the plague. Bro, she is all bit up. Thomas's friend comes home and finds his wife in hysteria, similar to Ellen when Thomas was away. He and Ellen have an argument and decides to send Thomas and Ellen back home. At the Hooter house, Ellen decides to spill the beans on her previous arrangement that she had with Count Orlok, which leads to an argument, which leads to Ellen acting like a demon from The Conjuring, which leads to them having sex, which leads to Ellen waking up from a trance dream state of her acting like a demon and having sex with Thomas. Trust me, it was 10 times more freaky in the theater. We had moans, ass, and I think a few nipples. But Thomas comforts her, and like that, the first scene of the movie started to make sense. Ellen had just gotten married, and the dream in the beginning was a trance from Orlok because Ellen had broken her arrangement previously with him. And it was done in a way that when you saw Orlok in the first scene, you weren't sure if it was actually him or a nightmare she was having of another monster. Robert Eggers. I see you. Now, what happens next was the most twisted shit I've seen in a while. Thomas's friend and his wife are asleep in their home, and then we see Orlok's shadow overtake the husband, who is then told by Orlok, "Don't wake up." The wife wakes up hearing her daughter screaming for help, and she is trying to wake up her husband, and he does not even budge. She rushes to the children's room, and she sees Count Orlok with the corpses of her daughter sucked dry of blood. Damn. The nigga went after the kids. And the next day we see 3 coffins going into the graveyard of a single mausoleum. And it contains Thomas's friend's wife and 2 daughters. But here's the kicker. The wife was pregnant with their unborn son. So that's 4 deaths. Let's have a quick moment of silence and then a round of applause for the screenwriting. This is everybody's low point, because now Thomas's friend is 100% committed to Thomas, Ellen, Dr. Franz, and the other doctor to defeat the supernatural. Of course, there was screaming and an argument at first, but homie was hurting. He was a rich guy who was in the shipping business, I believe, and he lost everything that was important to him. Now, the group makes a plan to kill Orlok before the 3rd night, because on the 3rd night, Orlok said he would kill Thomas if Ellen did not reject her vow to Thomas and renew her vow to Orlok. But that's when things take a turn for the worse. Thomas's friend does not reunite with the group and goes to the mausoleum. He removes the cover of the coffin of his wife and unborn son, who resides in the womb, and rests his head on her body before coughing up blood. That's when I knew he swallowed poison, because he could not stand the grief. Thomas and the team find his body, and Dr. Franz says that due to the curse of the Nosferatu, we have to burn the bodies, which they do. And I'm pretty sure that's illegal. But the group ventures off to Orlok's home that Thomas sold him, where a while back he realizes that the paperwork was altered by the employer to include the sale of his wife as well. He's selling people now? Shit. Ellen is back at the home for safety purposes. The group arrive at the worn down X mansion and find Orlok's coffin. They remove it and stab the motherfucker inside, but it wasn't Orlok. It was the employer. Clever. But then that means that Orlok is heading to Thomas's home, and Dr. Franz revealed that this was the plan Ellen wanted. Thomas rushes home while Dr. Franz burns down the entire estate. And then we see Orlok's shadow at the Hooter house, creeping up the stairs. Orlok and Ellen reunite, and she cancels her vow with Thomas and renews it with Orlok to save the town. They then strip naked, and I think they were either having sex or Orlok was just having lunch from sucking the blood from her chest. Either way, the Count was getting some of that vanilla lovin', if you know what I mean. The sun was coming up and Orlok took notice, but Ellen kept him in the bed, which was the plan the entire time. The sunlight comes through and Orlok dies on top of Ellen. This actually reminded me of a news story of a dude who died after having an orgasm. And when I think about it, this movie is technically about an old white man who doesn't like the sun and likes to nibble on the necks of women. Wait, that sounded like Joe Biden. Or rather, Joe Biden. So, Joe Biden, the movie. This is almost like that one movie Once Bitten, but told backwards. Thomas arrives home to find Orlok dead in his bed with Ellen, and Dr. Franz arrives to witness it all. That's one hell of a night. Ellen sacrificed herself to save others, but on the flip side, she did it all in her husband's bed. The emotional story behind the action story of this film is actually an interesting one. But to understand it, you have to dive deep into what each of the main characters' motivation is. So I'll break it down like this. Everyone is motivated by love in their own way. Thomas is motivated by the love of his new wife, to provide a better life for the two of them. Ellen is motivated by the love of her husband to make sure he is safe and alive. Thomas's friend is motivated by the love of his wife, unborn son, and 2 daughters to make sure they are well taken care of. The employer is motivated by love, but in a more sadistic way, because it is a love for power granted to him by his master, Count Orlok. Dr. Franz is motivated by his love for the unknown and for solidifying evidence of the existence of supernatural forces, but to what cost? Count Orlok is motivated by the love he has for Ellen, to acquire a bride, if not willingly, then by force. How each of these characters handle what motivates them, it shapes the film, and it's when Thomas leaves Ellen with a friend that they all start experiencing Count Orlok's influence. If the action story's problem is to defeat Count Orlok and return everything to normal, then the emotional story is the protection of their love and desires, which reveals their weaknesses. This is shown in situations that causes the characters to lose or gain the thing they love the most. I'll give you an example. Thomas's weakness is that he is blinded by the money, which causes him to ignore all the signs that his job was not as it seemed to be. He got paid, but at what cost? Ellen's weakness was really shown when she could not be honest about her previous encounter with Count Orlok until we near the end of Act 2 in the movie. What sacrifice does she now have to make to set things right? Thomas's friend's weakness is his lack of belief in the happenings of the supernatural, which caused the loss of his family, not his business. He refused to believe the truth of what has been happening to Ellen, while Thomas was away. What did that cost him? The employer's weakness is purely greed. That greed cost him his life, being willing to die in place of someone as sinister as Orlok. Dr. Franz's weakness is in his over-obsession with the supernatural. Orlok is dead, but Ellen is dead too. Does this feel like a victory? What will Dr. Franz do with the corpse of Orlok? And finally, Count Orlok's weakness is in handling rejection, where his lust for a woman motivated him throughout the entire film. When he sees that Ellen has moved on from their promise, and it sets the entire movie in motion from the first scene. The employer selected Thomas for a reason. My takeaway from this film is that love cannot be forced upon another, and that we cannot let our biases and obsessions cloud our judgment, even when the answers seem too good to be true. I guess you can say, what profit is there for a man to gain the whole world but lose his soul in the process? If I had to rate this movie, then it would get a solid 4 stars. Here's why. Fundamentally, they acknowledged the original story and made it into their own with little modifications to the plot, which still made sense to the tale. Their technique in crafting the story via cinematography was actually well done, and each scene made sense to me, where the mood matched the artistry. The acting was superb, though at times I felt William Dafoe got a little too excited at the end, when he burned down Orlok's home in Germany. Lastly, the overall plot of the movie made sense, and I wouldn't mind seeing it again or buying it on Blu-ray, if that's still a thing. One thing I would add is that the emotional story, although present and profound, could have been a bit more stronger and deeper in some areas. If you want an example of what it means to have heart in a story, then this next video will explain just that.